will tell you, I've had a chance to talk to Dr. Parrish, and quite frankly, he definitely gets it. Number one. Secondly, he doesn't talk in economic speak. He's very he's almost, well, he is Southern. He's from Alabama. I'm from Mississippi, so he and I can fluently talk to one another. The only problem, he's a original Auburn graduate, and I had to remind him the worst beating Auburn got was when they were leading by 30 points against Mississippi State, and Mississippi State scored 40 unanswered at Auburn and won. He didn't want to talk about that. Actually, he's now, I guess, a null because Dr. Parrish is a Ph.D. of Economics at Florida State University. He was also the head economist for the Chamber of Commerce for the state of Florida. He's also worked in the private sector. He understands business and communities, and he's very adept to the state of Florida. He's tailored his presentation also to talk about here in Lake and Sumter County. As he does his presentation, he's wanted me to point out that there may be a question about something. You may have a question during the presentation. He doesn't mind saying, hey, can you tell me about this? I have a question about that. He doesn't mind if you speak up. Susan will be around with a mic, and we are streaming this live because a lot of people want to watch it streamed. We're taping it. We're also, other people will be joining us. So we're construction people. For the non-construction people in this room, we're common folk. We eat out of box lunches, sack lunches, but we hope to make it as enjoyable as possible. We have plenty of Cokes and sodas back there. If you want more to eat, we'll have plenty of that. So I think that's all I have to say. The last thing, I'd like to introduce Dan Roebuck Sr. Mr. Roebuck's in the back of the room. He's the owner of RoMac Building Supply, and his father, Buck, founded the company. And since 1945, RoMac Building Supply has been an institution here in Central Florida. So at this time, it's my honor and privilege to introduce Dr. Jerry Parrish, and he's going to start his presentation now. Thank you, Dr. Parrish.
Yeah, that'd be great. Hope y'all can still see to eat. All right. Is this thing wired or wireless? Wireless? Yeah, I'm gonna move. I'm gonna walk around a little bit here. See if my clicker's gonna work. All right, cool. I'll just lay these out right here. Welcome, everyone. I'm glad to be here with you today. And we're going to talk about the Florida economy. We're going to talk about a lot of stuff. And I want to talk to you a little bit about how Florida's doing and how Florida's different from the U.S. When you watch the national news, a lot of times stuff that you hear really doesn't apply to us, or Florida's ahead of it, or Florida's behind what's going on. And that's, that's a big issue right now. So I got a bunch of slides. I'll be glad to leave a set of these slides, a copy of them if any of you guys want some info. I know you're not going to be able to see it. Got a lot, a few maps and things like that. I really want to start off by saying there's really two economies going on right now. You hear on the national news, if you listen to them long enough, you'll probably go crawl in a hole somewhere and hide. But you got to think about what's really going on here. And I've never seen an economy like this before, because what we've got here, this is Florida's open jobs. You can see it's drastically up. It went up a bunch this last month. There's over 600,000 open jobs right now. Unemployment's low. Everybody tells me they're having a hard time finding workers. That's been going on for a while. That's been the #1 issue for every business in the state of Florida. I don't think anybody's been able to escape that. And so, even if you have a good workforce, people are bidding up salaries and people are changing jobs and moving, and COVID happened and now everybody wants to work from home that can, and all these different things are going on. But also at the same time, you have this, almost 100% unemployment or employment, where anybody that wants a job can get one if they'll just get up and go get one. You know, what's fascinating to me is, let me tell you, I'm 61 years old. I've seen a lot of stuff. I've never seen it and would beat my kid to death if they were doing what some of these people are doing now. They're going on interviews and accepting jobs and then not showing up on the first day of work. You know, or they're not showing up for the interview. And it's just, you know, insanity. So, but what you also do is we poll Floridians, and they do this. You may hear this, the Michigan Consumer Sentiment Poll. That's a national poll. We do one here in Florida. And the University of Florida does it. The Bureau of Economic and Business Research, BEBR is what I call them. They do a great job. They do basically the same exact poll, just to Floridians. And what you can see now is, yeah, we had a little bump up last month, but it's at all-time lows. I mean, we're at 40-plus year lows on consumer sentiment. If you're not familiar with these things, they basically ask you a question is, how are you feeling about the economy? Is this a good time to spend money on a capital good, some expensive purchase, blah, blah, blah? Well, it's typically a leading indicator of people spending, and we know people spending is what drives the economy, right? So about 70% of the whole economy runs on people spending money. So if they're not in such a great mood and they're not willing to spend money, what does that mean for the future? Typically, yeah, not so good stuff. But what you can see now is at 62.9, at the worst of the pandemic, it was higher than that. It was 76.3. And so we had all this unknown. We didn't know if we were all going to die of some virus. Or, you know, people were shutting states down and companies were shutting down and everybody was being forced to go home. And consumer sentiment was better back then than it is right now. So something's going on. I'm going to kind of dissect what's going on. But first, let's talk about Florida. I'm going to talk a couple times about Florida and just kind of tell you where we are. If you're not, if you haven't heard me speak, I talk a lot about this because you kind of have to know where you come from to be able to figure out where you're going. Now, this is job numbers. I just wanted to show you here, we had this big drop-off. February to April of 2020, we lost almost 1.3 million jobs when we shut this place down. 1.3 million is a big deal. Just so you know, there's about 10 million people working in Florida. Now, there's about 9 million on the job numbers. The difference here is this series. This is a real stable series. I use it, but it doesn't include the self-employed. So, there's about a million gap between this number and who's actually working here. But we dropped way down over a couple of months. I mean, it was chaotic. The stock market dropped, the job numbers dropped, 1.3 million. It took us 18 months to recover back to where we were before COVID. Now, since COVID, since the recovery, we recovered back to zero. We're about 223,000 jobs above where we were before COVID. So about 2.5% gain. So really during that 2-year period, we got about a year's worth of normal job growth. It's not uncommon for us to grow 180, 200,000 jobs a year. What's interesting about this chart is if you start at 2015, where this thing starts, think about this. From 2015 to the first of the pandemic, Florida grew 1 out of every 11 jobs in this country. That's a big deal. Florida's about 5% of the U.S. economy. So 1 out of 20 would be average. We almost doubled the average. That tells you what's been going on down here. And you all know it. You see people moving in here. They're coming in to take jobs. They're coming in, moving their companies here. It's been going on for quite a long time now. But during that period, think of that, more than 1 out of every 11 jobs in the country. So let's think about the recovery, though. Was Florida faster or slower than most states? Hey, we were killing it before the pandemic. What do y'all think? Who thinks we recovered faster? Most people believe that. Well, you're absolutely right. Here's a map of the U.S. If you're red, you have lost jobs since the pandemic. And this is a real stable job series. This only goes through December of last year, but it's a really good indicator because these numbers have already been revised and they're fixed. They're not going to change. So we got one point in time. All the numbers from January till now are going to get revised in March of next year. So, and they sometimes swing, 20 and 30% swing. So, but this is the good stable way to look at it. As of December, Florida was actually the number 6 as far as job recovery on percentage basis. The only people that beat us in the Southeast is North Carolina. We beat Texas. We beat all these places except for the western states, Idaho, Utah. What's happening out there? Absolutely. People leaving California with private capital and buying stuff, taking their business, whatever they're doing there. And of course, they're starting from a lot lower base than we are, right? We got 22 million people. Some of those states don't have that many people. So it's easy to be a higher percentage, but look at what's happening in New York, down 5.3%. Vermont looks like New Hampshire, all those northern states are down. And shouldn't be surprising to you because a lot of them are moving to Florida, right? You see all these different tags here. It's not just the visitors now, it's people that have moved in here. So that's really important, but what's just as important is what's happened in Florida. Which industries have got all their jobs back and which haven't? Who wants to guess who hasn't gotten their jobs back? Construction, you're wrong. Tourism is one of them. Healthcare is another one. Here's the list. Anything above the black line is recovered. Construction up 2%. They recovered the equal number of jobs back in October of last year. Manufacturing, a little higher percentage, all the way up to professional business services. That education and health services, I don't lump education and health services together. The Bureau of Labor Statistics does. That's their thing. It's actually healthcare. There's less healthcare jobs now than there was before. Why? People are retiring early and leaving the industry, nurses especially, right? Number 1 job opening right now in Florida and probably certainly the U.S. and the world, registered nurses. Not even close. It's been that way for a long time, but now they've left. School teachers left, so education, but they've recovered as far as job numbers. But a lot of school teachers retired early. A lot of nurses just left the business. So that's what we have left to recover. But we've gotten some pretty high value jobs. That professional business services, those pay a lot. A lot of those people, guess what? They moved in here because they can work from anywhere, right? They came down, some of them came down, grandma's condos over here in Daytona. I'll spend COVID at grandma's, condominium down there. And then it's like, well, hey, now my company's going to let me work from anywhere I want to. I'll just stay down here. Not so excited to stay in grandma's condo, but maybe I can't afford another place of my own. Maybe I will stay in Daytona. A lot of that stuff is happening. What's cool about it is, and I do a lot of rural economic development. I work with rural counties all over this state and have for a long time. I got a farm background, so I like those folks, and they like me, and they don't have anybody to help them. But I help them. And what's the coolest thing is some of our rural counties have been repopulating. I'll talk a little more about that in just a second. Well, let's talk about growth. Population growth is the way Florida has done economic development for a long time. Is that the best way? No. You're right, capital. Private capital is the way to do it. But we've been blessed or cursed with a bunch of people moving here. So let's talk about that. But first, let's talk about housing starts. I wanted to throw this in here. I'm not going to ignore the housing market. And so I wanted to put this in early. We're going to talk about that. I wanted to see you guys, if you didn't know this, to see where we were, as busy as you guys are right now and got people standing in line to give you business in a lot of cases. We're still not building, housing starts are still not where they were, back before the Great Recession. Now, is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? It depends on who's looking at it, right? But good, solid growth since the recovery from the recession. You guys, I don't have to tell you. I have to tell business people about stuff like this. I don't have to tell you guys, but there is a misperception out there that we're building houses faster than we were before the recession. Yes, sir. That's exactly right. You know, that's the big thing. And I'm going to talk about, you know, people older in the workforce as well. But that is a big issue. You lose older people that have experience and can train people. You lose your institutional knowledge, and some of those people just can't be replaced. You can bring somebody else in, but it takes a long, long time, and that was the big issue. And plus, we weren't training people, right? Where's our vocational training? Where's all that stuff? We're trying to catch up with that now. Everybody's got a program. And so let me be honest, I love our state colleges. You know, they do a great job, our two-year schools. Florida's got the best state college system in the entire country. I will tell you that. And they're scrambling, trying to do everything they can to help the labor force. But when you ignored it for as long as we did, then you're always catching up, right? Yes, sir. Man, if Don could have, we didn't stage this. Don is the perfect setup, man, because I'm going to talk about population change by state. And I swear he didn't see these slides. This is just pure dumb luck, which I'm a fan of right there. I'll take it. Let's think about Florida, how we grew. This, you know, every 10 years we actually count people. In the middle years, we actually make estimates based on estimates for 9 years, and then we actually go around and count people and true things up. So we got some real numbers. I did this, and you can't see the numbers here, but this, if it's a dark area, it grew at a high percentage. And here we are, Florida grew 2.7 million people between 2010 and 2020. That is a big deal. That is a 14+%. Texas grew a little faster than us. So did the western states, but you've already figured out why that is. People leaving California. And remember, it's easier to grow by a percentage when you're a smaller state than it is a bigger state. So where is Florida? Florida's number 8. We're a big state, man. We're the top 3 population state, and we still were number 8. That's a big deal. Where are those people coming from? When you look at it, you know, you have to subtract the people that leave. People do leave. When I moved to Florida in 2004, I moved from western North Carolina. I got the chance to live anywhere I wanted to. I literally had a job, and they said, you know, live anywhere you want to as long as there's an airport. And I said, I'm moving to Asheville, North Carolina. And they said, don't you want to think about it? And I said, man, I've been thinking about this for a long, long time, if I ever got this chance. So anyway, I moved from there. We had all kind of people moving from Florida up there, right? What did we call them? Halfbacks, you're right. Because they'd moved to Florida from New Jersey or Connecticut or somewhere up there where it's cold. They came to Florida, spent one summer down here, and just said, oh, I ain't doing that. So there are people that leave, but right now there's about 1,000 net new people a day in Florida. And my guess is it's around 1,200 moving in and a couple of hundred moving out. Sometimes they move out to take care of their parents or go to college, or they just, you know, they got an opportunity to go somewhere else for whatever reason. But net 1,000 people a day, that's a whole lot. But Florida, you know, there's states that have lost population. West Virginia, Illinois. Why are people leaving Illinois? The government's broke. The pension system's broke. So what happens when people flee? The people that are left end up paying all the taxes, right? So they're coming to Florida. But we get most of our people from New York on a net basis is number 1. Where do they go? East Coast typically. Ohio, they come in. Where do they go? East or West Coast, could be both. If they come in from further in the Midwest, they typically go to the Gulf Coast. That's more, you know, more typical than not. We got a bunch of New York, New Jersey people. They'll start down there in Miami or Broward or Palm Beach or somewhere, and then get tired of that and kind of move up the East Coast is what we see. But what's interesting is, and I tell this and I can prove it, Florida grew at the lowest percentage rate it ever has since we've been keeping records, at least through 1900. You believe that? Don't doubt me, man. I'm right. Here is the graph. Florida's on the top. as far as percentage. It's the slowest percentage we've grown since 1900. Well, why is that? Well, hey, we're big. We got 22 million people. It's hard to grow by a big percentage. We're still growing by a lot of people. But look at compared to the U.S. U.S. grew at the second slowest rate since 1900. Only other time we grew slower was during the Great Depression. And look at that big spike in the 50s and 60s in Florida. What happened? Air conditioning. Dr. John Gorey invented air conditioning from Apalachicola, Florida, and some dude named Carrier really commercialized it. And by this time in the 50s and 60s, it was affordable for your house. A lot of people moving down here. But remember, that's from a lower base too. It's still a bunch of people, but think about this. We're growing at the slowest rate we ever have, but we're growing at double what the U.S. is growing. So that's kind of where we are. Just think about this. This shows every single county. And what's interesting is the big counties grew the most. Orange, Hillsborough, Miami-Dade as far as numbers, but it's Osceola, St. John, Sumter, and Walton. Lake County's number 5 on percentages here, right? So 29.3% in 10 years. Wow, that's big. What's key here is 17 counties lost population during this time. Which ones were they? No. Rural counties in Florida are depopulating, have been depopulating. Remember I told you I do a lot of rural economic development? That's been the biggest issue. Who leaves? People with opportunity and skills leave. They go to the city because they can find a job. Guess who's left? People that can't leave, and typically people that don't have as much opportunity. They're left paying all the bills. The county's still got to pay for, garbage disposal and water and all that stuff. They're left paying the bills. It's a horrible, horrible, downward cycle. But now we've got some relief here, which is good. And thanks to COVID, there's got to be something good that happens out of it. What's more important for you guys, I think, is what the population is expected to grow over the next 10 years. We know this is in the books. This is history. It is what it is. Well, here's a slide I like to call Florida's next million people, 4 million people. And what it shows is, and this comes out of Bieber as well, what it shows is the dense counties get denser. They grow the most, Miami-Dade, Orange, Hillsborough, Broward. So there's Orange at an extra 381,600. When could this happen? Somewhere 2030 to 2035. We don't know exactly. I'll tell you, forecasting population is pretty tough here. But look, Lake County's number 6, expected to grow another 29.2%. There's Orange, another 25.6%. That's big. When you're in the top 10 on percentages too, on top of being in top of numbers, that means people are expecting this. Now, this is a forecast that I believe is going to change. This has the top 4 counties getting, a third of the growth, top 7 getting almost half, top 17 getting 3/4 of the growth. The population's going to spread. There's going to be less going into those dense counties. Why is that? Running out of room. You're getting the relative pricing is so high that people will move out. So we got a couple of things happening. We got relative pricing, and we've got COVID. Hey, if you only have to show up for work once a week or once a month, what are your options? It's like, hey, I'd have a 2-hour commute. If I only have to go in the office once a week. If I only have once a month, hey, maybe I'm working in Chicago. I'm going to get on a plane. Most places in Florida, and if you were from Tallahassee, you would think this was super funny. Everywhere in Florida except Tallahassee has many direct flights to everywhere. We don't. I told that joke yesterday when I spoke in Tallahassee. They rolled in the floors. They thought it was funny. But anyway, that changes the game, right? The labor market changes are going to change the way we move and the way we work. It's going to take traffic off the roads in some cases. Hey, I like working a couple days a week in the office. I get to see my office friends and use the printer and do all that stuff, steel staples and whatever you do for your home office. So really a lot of changes go on there, and it's really going to affect this. Now, I want to talk about GDP, and I'm going to kind of flip through these pretty quickly, but I want to tell you what GDP is. Now, we economists have this big fancy formula, and I can't remember what it is, and I really don't care what it is. I want you to think about GDP, and you hear a state GDP, county GDP, the U.S. GDP. You know, you got to think about Florida. Florida's GDP is over $1 trillion, but most people can't figure out what that is. What is GDP? Think about it in terms of value added. Value added. You get a bunch of components, you build a house, you know, for whatever the difference in what you sold that house for and what you built that house for, that's value added, right? Same thing with the restaurant meal. What do you pay for the ingredients versus what do you pay for the final goods? That's exactly what it is. And the reason it's important is high GDP growth typically means you're growing a lot of high-wage jobs, because high-wage jobs are really, really highly correlated with GDP. So that's why it's important. And not a lot of people ever get to hear that explanation. Now, Florida, over this 10-year period, 2011-2021, grew by 62.4% GDP versus the U.S. at 47.4. I may have said that wrong. Florida grew by 62.4, 15 percentage points higher than the U.S. at 47.4. So we are adding those high-wage jobs, right? Most people don't really think about that. They think, especially if you're from outside of Florida, it's like, well, Florida's just Mickey Mouse and a bunch of beaches, and there's really not anything else going on in here. Well, we all know that's wrong, but not everybody from other states does. Now, when we look at GDP by county, I've got the 4 counties that make up a lot of your service area here. You know, Orange, of course, is big. The dark areas have the biggest GDP. It's southeast. Remember, about 30% of Floridians live in those 3 counties in the southeast down there. The ones we don't go to a lot unless we have to. Maybe you guys enjoy it down there. I don't. It's kind of tough, the traffic and all that stuff. It's hot, it's flat. But anyway, here's the relative size here. So this gives you a start. Sumter doesn't have a lot, $4.7 billion, but that's still $4.7 billion happening in Sumter. And there's a lot of other stuff happening there, right? Marion, Lake, about the same size. Orange County, obviously the biggest one. But here's what's important, the growth. Which ones are growing? And what you can't see, if you can't see from the back, is Sumter over this 2012. These are 2 different time frames. They overlap most of the time, but this is the latest data available is 2020. What you've got here is Sumter County growing by 98.6%, so basically doubling in that 10-year period. So what does that tell you? That tells you moving in higher income retirees actually is a way to develop your economy, right? Is it the best way? Somebody said no back there before. Where's my man? No, it's not. But it is a way. So different counties approach things differently. They hit upon something that's very, very popular, and you got to give them credit. They're growing over there. A lot of people want to live there. So, and you can see your county if you're from one of the surrounding counties around here. Still growth, good solid growth compared to Florida. Orange County is the only one that grew at less than the state of Florida, and that may surprise you because there's a lot of good stuff happening in Orange County. They got a great manufacturing. People are shocked at how many manufacturing jobs and things are going on down there. But let's talk about, I'm going to go back to population growth a minute. I told you there's forecasts out there. What I showed you was kind of the high forecast. But I want to tell you how difficult the job is to forecast population. Anytime you forecast anything more than a year in advance, it is treacherous. I had to give a forecast yesterday. I spoke at the Economics Club of Florida, which just happens to be based in Tallahassee. And I had to do a forecast. And I put up a bunch of other forecasts beside mine and talked about how really specific one of them was as far as when it started and exactly how much and all these different things. It's tough. So let's give the Bieber guys a little slack here because they don't know. They're doing the best job they can. They're great at what they do. But I want to show you the range of forecast here over the next several years. All right, by 2030, here's where we start. We're going to start with a low, nothing over 13% and 13.4, and that is Sumter County. Orange 5.2, Marion 2.4, Lake 7.8%. Remember, population growth is good and bad. Who are you attracting? What skills do they have? You know, do they have enough money to spend a lot of money and develop the economy? Those kind of things. So that's the low forecast. And I'm going to stick up the medium one here. There's a big difference. It's basically triple. Not in every single case, but basically triple. You go from the low to the median. Triple the amount of people. And now when we stick in the high, it's some big numbers. Another 47.3% for Sumter, 35.9% for Lake. So that tells you how hard it is. And I'm going to tell you it's even harder because if you were an economist, I would tell you that this is an endogenous variable. Now, I teach grad students, so I get to say that to them every once in a while. You know, hey, you got to be careful because this is an endogenous variable. Unless you've been in economic school in the last few years, you don't even know what that is. Let me tell you what that is. If you're going to gauge one of these forecasts, you got to think about the counties that want development and the counties that don't. Endogenous means they've got control over it. Are they going to make it so expensive that there is no way you can do it? Yes, some of them will. Some of them, I hear it out there all the time. Whoa, we got to put on the brakes on this. They're getting out of hand. Our infrastructure can't keep up, blah, 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 blah. And I wrote an article. There's a magazine called Evolve that comes out of Daytona. A friend of mine is the editor, and he asked me to write this article about growth. What's good growth, what's not, you know, all that stuff. Just came out like a week ago. And I encourage you to read it if you're interested in an economist's take on this. One of the things I told people, and let me tell you, I speak at county commission meetings. I see a lot of this stuff. I spoke at one recently up in Baker County, up near Jacksonville. There's something out there that's really happening. There's a lot of not just anti-growth people. There's a lot of anti-everything people. It's like, we don't want anything, you know. Matter of fact, take back the last 10,000 people that moved in here and make them go somewhere else. And so they, and you guys, maybe you've heard it. Tell me if you've heard this or not. And I put this in this article, and I've gotten quite a few chuckles out of it. People call me and say, man, I've never heard that. It's banana. Do y'all know what a banana is? Those are the people that say build absolutely nothing anywhere near anything. And they're out there. I'm going to tell you about this project. I went up to Baker County, and you know, hey, this thing's going to be taped. I'll stand up. I mean, there's videotape of that. I can prove it. So I'm not worried about the press or anything. But there was an agriculture project up there. Jerry, the farm boy, says agriculture is good. They're growing fresh fruits and vegetables for Floridians. They're not impacting the economy or the environment in a bad way. They're meeting all the permit requirements. Water discharge is not a problem. They're basically building huge greenhouses to grow stuff inside in the off seasons, which is good. Don't we need more healthy fruits and vegetables for Floridians? I think we can all agree that we do. You may not get your kids to eat them, but you know, we should have them there. We had people protesting against that. And so I think one of the things you guys are going to have to think about, there's people that no matter what this industry tries to do, they're going to protest it. You can have the cleanest situation, follow every rule and regulation, and I know there's billions of them out there, and you're going to have more and more people. The more crowded Florida gets, the more of that, the more those people, if they're in the ear of your county commissioner, city councilman, it's going to be worse and worse, and they're going to drive up impact fees to where it's just not even economically feasible. You have to think about that coming in. Now, you know, that kind of swings the other way. When the economy's not so good, what do counties and cities do? It's like, hey, we need more tax revenue. We should probably do this thing that we wouldn't have when the economy was you know, running at full steam. So you have to look out at that. That's something that's absolutely going to happen. Well, let's talk about a little bit about not just population. Population are people. Are those people have enough money to buy a house, add on to their house, you know, buy stuff that runs the economy, new trucks, new cars, and all that stuff? I'm not sure anybody has enough money to buy a new truck right now because I've been looking at them. I've got an 07 F-150. It's only got about 270,000 miles on it. Air conditioner went out last week on the way up to the farm up in Alabama. You talk about hot, man. It is hot. So then I went around and looked at new ones, and it's like, no, that ain't happening. But those people, who are you getting in? What age or what age group are they in? Let's take a look at that. First of all, here's the numbers. This is just the average growth rate here, by counties. You can see Sumter's got the highest percentage here. Same basic numbers, just a little different data set than I used before, but this will kind of give you the relative size here, what we're thinking about. But what I wanted to do is show you the makeup of the counties as far as what is forecast by age, and age is super important, right? If kids are young, you got to build schools if there's a bunch of them coming in. If people are older, what if they're older and working age? Hey, that's typically very positive, because companies want to move in where there's a bunch of working age people, right? That's one of our big limiting factors of people moving to Florida. Not like some of them aren't moving, but that's a big, big deal. So let's take a look at the age profile of what the change is expected to be. This is the medium forecast once again. Medium forecast, not the wild one on one side, not the super low one. This is the medium. How are people going to change? And you don't have to read the numbers. I'll tell you, the youngest ones are at the top and the oldest ones are at the bottom. So actually, this is the 4 counties lumped together, expectation 440,000 people over the next 10 years. Actually, really nice looking profile. You got some young people in there. You got a lot of this 35 to 49 age group coming in here. There's a bunch of them. And it's also negative in one category, 55 to 60. How can that happen, Jerry? There's 1,000 net new people moving to Florida every day. How can you have less people in 2030 than you have right now in any age category? Anybody want to answer that? That one's tough. Think about population. If you're old like me, actually I'm a baby boomer, believe it or not. We're kind of the tail end of the baby boomers. Some of us don't claim them, but you got to think about that. There's a big lump of people born right after the war, right? The baby boomers, a huge amount of people. And then not so many people on a relative basis born that next 20, 25 years. And then another bunch called the echo boom. Now, I'm glad you've all finished your lunch, looks like, because I'm going to tell you something you may not digest very well. The demographic people call that the rat in the snake. What does that mean? You ever seen a boa constrictor eat a rat or a rabbit or something like that? There's this big lump that goes through. Then it eats something else, and it's another big lump. That's the way population is. Baby boom, big lump of people aging out. What happens during this time is there's a lump of people. There weren't that many people born then. And so there's actually going to be less of them during that time, but then behind them will come another lump. That's how that thing works. Why is that important? What happens when you're age 55 to 60? You may well be at the peak earning years of your life. Maybe you're buying motorhomes or a second home or, grandkids' toys. All this stuff is taxable. And remember, that's super important. Florida runs on sales taxes. The state of Florida's budget, more than 80% of the general revenue, not the trust fund stuff and all that, more than 80% of the general revenue is sales and use taxes. So it's in our best interest to have people making as much money and spending it here in Florida as we can, right? That's actually a good way to run a state. It's much more efficient to tax consumption than it is income or inputs to business. And now we got less people in these high earning years, and we got a bunch more. We got 182,000 more people age 65 and older. Well, I'm not going to complain. I'm going to be in that category myself come 2030. But what changes? Typically, people under age 65 buy goods. They buy motorhomes, motorcycles, campers, fun stuff. And fun stuff really runs the economy. People, as they retire, though, a lot of times spend more on services that aren't taxable. And the way I say it is, you go from buying a lawnmower to hiring a service to mow your lawn. Right? You buy a lawnmower, and then you buy parts, and you keep the service guy busy and all that stuff. versus you pay some dude to come out here and cut your yard and trim it and do all that stuff because you think you're too old to do it. You know, it does happen, but that means you went from taxable goods to services, and that's not good for the state. And now you got a bunch more of those people. How's their portfolio doing? Have we come out of a stock market crash or things like that? We don't know at that point in time, but that really affects the income, really affects how much they can spend. So you got that going for you. On a percentage basis, I want to show it to you. This is even more important here. 40.2% increase in people 65 and older in this 4-county area. See, the percentages are not that big now on the lower side, but in 80 to 84, it's 61.7%. 85 plus 61.0. Wow, think about that. Think about aging in place in your industry. You know it's happening. It's always, you know, this is Florida, man. People move down here to retire. So you're used to that. There's going to be a ton more of that. How about the mother-in-law suite and the mother-in-law house and the assisted living? You know, what we see in a lot of places in Florida is you used to go in and build a golf course and you put a bunch of housing units around it. God knows how many of those happen in the state of Florida. It's, you know, it's beyond belief how many there were. Now what's happening really started, I think, in Southwest Florida. You build a medical facility instead of a golf course, and you put in the same golf cart paths where people can go to the doctor. And there's plenty of golf courses out there. Some people think we're oversupplied with them. So that's happening in a big, big way. You know, critical nursing care, all that stuff. We're not ready for that, and I don't see us. You know, certainly there's some moves toward taking advantage of this, but not as many as you would think. So that's going to be a big issue. It's always, you know, everything. You know, I'm an economist. Everything's good and bad. Good for some people, bad for others. Sometimes good and bad for the same people. But great opportunity to expand health care and those kind of things. Are we ready for it? Hey, we already got a doctor shortage. Now we got a nursing shortage that's even worse than the big shortage we already had. And now we got a bunch of people aging here in Florida, right? That's going to be a big issue. And, you know, it's going to affect a lot of things. I want to talk about pricing and inflation a little bit. I will tell you, I can't remember ever being as excited to doing my research to come speak to some group as when I saw this thing right here. Do y'all use this? Good. I have never seen a private company give this much information to their customers ever that I can remember. I think this thing is awesome. You know, it gives you a sense of where prices are going and where you can make the decisions that you need to for your business. And I got a chance to talk to Don this morning. It's like, Don, tell me, you know, is there some dude back here in the back corner doing this and just making up numbers? He said, no. He said, I do it, and these are legit. And that's awesome. You know, to have a private company do that, provide that as a service. Hey, I'm going to start using this thing when I travel around the state as an example of a true index to where you can see what's going on. And so what you can see is, you know, the major components, the structural components of the house, right, Don? You know, where we are. Prices have come down a little bit. I want to talk about prices right now. And you know, this is the most important thing that I think and is a misunderstood out there. There's a price component that I use a lot. Everybody knows shipping costs are up, right? There's an index on shipping a 40-foot container that used to be $1,300. $1,300 to ship a 40-foot container. That's just common before COVID, right? Well, it hit $13,000 during COVID. We all know the containers were in the wrong spot. You know, they were all over in China. Nobody, you know, they shut down. Everything happened. Freight costs went just up crazy. Well, now it's down to $6,500. And I get the sense some people are thinking, hey, shipping costs are now half of what they used to be. Well, technically true, but they're also 5 times what a normal thing is. And you're seeing that right now in gas prices. You know, gasoline, you know, is down 40% or 40 cents over the past X number of weeks. Well, no, it's not. Let's look at where it actually was, compared to a year ago. So I think this price confusion is really causing a lot of people trouble. You're gonna see it, it's liars, liars, and statisticians. Once again, people will frame this the way they want to. Be really, really careful of that, because I can't think of anything now that's cheaper than what it was before COVID. Can y'all? It's not housing, not transportation. It's not, groceries. It's not anything else like that. And so what's happening is a lot of the people, let's say you had a client who had enough income to qualify for the loan to build onto their house, to, remodel or do whatever they want to. Well, now it's not only interest rates gone up, building materials are up, but these necessities are taking a higher percentage of their take-home pay. And so a lot of people are going to be priced out here. And inflation, we can talk more about that later, but inflation is a horrible thing. It's a tax on people, and it's especially a high tax on low-income people. And so people, no doubt, they're going to have to downsize their house. They're going to have to do without those amenities and hope to, build them, add them later. You can see that happening, and it's not just the interest rates. I don't think that's going to surprise you. Let's talk about the news. What should you believe in the news? Don't believe anything. Unless you hear it from an economist. How's that? Yeah, good. You're probably smart. Hey, Warren Buffett says, never take financial advice from an economist unless he's rich. So don't take any kind of advice from an economist. But I do want to tell you we are pretty useful. But the thing is about inflation, it's rampant. You've seen it in the headlines. I'm going to show you some here. Amid high inflation, 36% of employees earning $100,000 or more say they are living paycheck to paycheck. Who believes that? Right. But of course, people that make higher incomes than that are okay, right? Well, there's 36%. The next headline says a third of Americans making $250,000 live paycheck to paycheck. So what does that tell you? It tells you that no matter how much money you give somebody, a third of them are going to be irresponsible. That's a joke. That's an economist joke. But think about this. What do Americans do? When they come to build a house, they're going to find out how much they qualify for, every single penny. They're going to spend every single penny. Nobody's saying, well, I think I'll just go with like 60% of what I could actually afford. Some people do. They're like me, whose parents grew up in the Depression and beating their heads that one day you're going to be broke, you better save your money. Or, maybe there are people that lived through the Depression. I don't know. But rarely do you see that, right? What percentage do you guess, and I don't know the answer, what percentage do you guess you people, would say, yeah, I can afford a $500,000 house, but I'm going to go with that 350 model. Doesn't happen a whole lot, right? And that's why a lot of people are struggling paycheck to paycheck here. I'm not feeling sorry for this group, let me be blunt. But remember, this is a national survey. There are some people that live in New York and San Francisco. That's probably a lot of the people that answered this stupid poll that they had. But what it does tell you is that even your high-income people may be struggling here, and that may be something that affects you. All right, let's talk about the recession. The R word, as I like to say. 70% of people think there's one coming. 70% of Americans believe that there's a recession coming. Well, if you're an economist, you say, of course one's coming, but don't ask me to tell you when it's going to happen. There's going to be one. There always is one every once in a while. But this is, of course, a more imminent thing that they're talking about. People think it's soon. Why? Because they're watching the news and things are super negative. And they are in some states, trust me. Not necessarily Florida. But what do I know about recessions? Well, I've actually written a lot of papers on the recession. Let me show you one. Used to be the chief economist at Florida Tax Watch. And Tax Watch is a group in Tallahassee. They call themselves the watchdog of the state budget. They want to make sure that every bill has gone through every committee, and they come up with this turkey list. If somebody tries to slide something in at the last minute, it ends up on the turkey list. They're a really good organization. I enjoyed working for them for 4 years. But I wrote a paper. Here's what's important about recessions. Just because somebody thinks we're in a recession or the national news says we're in a recession doesn't mean Florida's in one. And what I did with this paper is I proved that Florida's economy is different. Our business cycle is different. And it was talking about the Great Recession. This is 2011. We're coming out of the Great Recession. Florida, you guys know, if you were here, you know what happened. Property values dropped. People went bankrupt. They lost their houses. They lost their cars. You know, a lot of things happened. Florida's recession was twice as long and twice as deep. We went in earlier. We came out later than the U.S., and I can prove it statistically. That's what this paper's about. And it got a lot of buzz. People saying, oh, well. But doesn't some people up north call out when we're in a recession? Well, for the U.S., that's true. There's 8 people at the National Bureau of Economic Research, and they're called the Dating Committee. They're the Business Cycle Dating Committee. They tell us about 9 months after the recession starts, they say, hey, we were in a recession starting 9 months ago. And about 6 months after it's over, they say, yeah, about 6 months ago we recovered. But Florida is different, and I want you to think about that when I show you some of these horrible headlines that you're watching right now. Mortgage demand at the lowest in 22 years. Home buyers are canceling deals at the highest rate since the pandemic, since the start of it. And sentiment pledges, this just came out on the 18th, a couple days ago. Home builder sentiment at the lowest. Wow. Make you want to go crawl in a hole, right? Maybe, maybe not. What you have to think about is what's going on in the state of Florida. You watch the national news, though. Here's some good news. Kids can't afford houses, so their parents are buying them for them. Hey, what about that person that just barely making ends meet at $250,000? Maybe it's because he bought his kid a house. How stupid is that? You know, I make fun of kids. I teach kids that are like 21, 22 years old. They're grad students. And I think about them, and I see my friends' kids and all that stuff buying houses. You know, they want a house just like their parents' has. Why can't they have a 4-bedroom, fabulous house that's got a pool in the back? Hey, that's what they want. How many of y'all, like me, started out with some crappy 2-bedroom house that was old, and you were proud to own your first house? Man, it was like, oh, I'm a big deal now. That's what I thought. I paid $17,000 for my first house, and I was happy to get it. But now people are spending all this money on their kids. That doesn't make any sense to me. All right, let's talk about what's going on. What do you hear in the news? Bond yields. Anybody heard the curve inversion? The yield curve is flattening. The yield curve has inverted. What that means is they're talking about basically 10-year government treasuries versus the 2-year, sometimes the 3 months. You know, normal times, a 10-year bond has a higher interest rates than a 2-year, right? You got to have some risk premium for time, you know, and what could happen during that next 8 years. But what's happening is the 10 years came down while they're pushing the 2 years up. And what that is flattening. You know, the interest rate's exactly what they're talking about. But now it's gone negative. So you get a higher interest rate on a 2-year bond than you do a 10-year. That makes no sense at all, but it happens a lot, and it's often cited as a signal for a recession. So it's the biggest it has been since 2000. It's 20 basis points when I looked it up a couple days ago. And the Federal Reserve tracks this, and this is pretty sophisticated. They make the maturities constant, so there's nothing weird going on, but this is the Federal Reserve. It's like, well, it hit below zero before even the pandemic recession. And hey, that thing was kind of a surprise. That was made by a disease. It wasn't made by business. but still people freaked out, and the bond market showed it. Now it is negative. So what I'm going to tell you about that is some people believe that is a signal for a recession. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. So when you hear the freaking out, think about this. It often takes, even if it is a signal, it often takes several months to get through the system. Now, some people have come out and said we're already in a recession. And I've got an article here. This is Dr. Snaith, Sean Snaith, super good guy, a really good economist down at UCF. He's, you often see him, out speaking. He and I speak at the same places on occasion. Super nice guy. He believes we're going to be in a recession this entire year. But of course, the dating committee hasn't come out and said we're in a recession. I'm going to tell you, I like Sean a lot, but I think he's wrong. I cannot imagine with this strong a labor market, this strong consumer demand, what's the big difference in this time and the Great Recession? Credit quality. We don't have liar's loans. I remember buying a house, right before the big Great Recession hit. And I asked my mortgage broker, do you think I can get this mortgage? And they laughed at me, and they said, of course you can. You got a job. There were so many people, liar's loans, that's what they call them, liar's loans, faking their income so they could qualify, and the banks were still giving them money. That's not happening this time. So if you're thinking you're going to buy a bunch of property cheap, if we do have a recession, forget it. Not happening. Balance sheets are high. Credit quality's really, really good. That's a big difference. But are we in a recession already? Well, 8 people up in Washington, D.C. may disagree with me, but I think not. And but we've got banks coming out and saying the U.S. is going to be in one in the next 12 months. These guys were weirdly specific. This is Nomura Bank. Most of the banks have probability of recession at 40 or 50%. And remember, this is national. This is not Florida. So they're saying, hey, it's going to start the 4th quarter this year, it's going to last 5 quarters long, and it's going to be a shallow recession. Wow, that is oddly specific. I mean, if you're an economist, you would rather be beaten to death as have to give that specific a forecast. You can sit there and say, yeah, there's 100% probability there's going to be a recession. Hey, that's a pretty good bet right there, right? Sometime the business cycle is going to go down. You know it's going to happen. It always does. But that one, hey, they're brave or stupid. I'm not real sure. We can't tell until 5 quarters from the 4th quarter of this year. We don't know. This dude says it's going to be longer and deeper than most people believe. And I'm going to tell you what I think at the end of this, whether we're going to go into one, whatever. But I want to tell you what I'm watching. Here's what I watch on the economy to see how Florida's doing. First of all, remember, job growth is still super strong. If we were in a recession, people would say, I'm taking down that posting. We don't need any more people. Now let's be blunt here. There's some of the tech companies starting to lay off people or not hire as many people. You're starting to hear that after they've hired tons, as many people as they could find and paid exorbitant salaries. Some of that is happening out there. But here's what I'm looking at. And I'm not talking about the euro specifically, but I'm talking about in general here, the strength of the U.S. dollar. There's good news and bad news, right? Dollar strong. Stuff we buy, components from other countries, theoretically should get cheaper if their currency hasn't gotten even stronger than the U.S., right? Now, against Europe, they got troubles. They're running out of natural gas. Who knows what's going to happen? So people are discounting their economy and therefore their currency. So right now, parity with the dollar, you can buy, I used to work for European companies. I worked for 3 European motorcycle companies. If you know Triumph, if you know Ducati, if you know KTM, if you're an off-roader, you know who KTM is. And I was over there a lot. I paid lots of money for euros. $1.38, now it's $1. So what's happened? How does that affect Florida? How does it affect here? All right, if you're European, we get a lot of our visitors from there, a lot of people coming over, opening businesses or moving their businesses to Florida, believe it or not, especially so they can get access to South America. The dollar just got super strong. It's much more expensive. all of that stuff we buy, though, from them, is theoretically should get cheaper. Now, some people say it doesn't. You're right. People manage their margins to keep prices from fluctuating a lot if they can. But what it also means is that guy in Chicago that wants to take his family on a vacation, wow, Europe just got relatively a lot cheaper than coming to Florida. It's like, yeah, we've been to Florida the last 2 or 3 years. Let's go to Europe. The euro's cheap. British pound is cheap. Some of these other countries, companies' currencies are cheap as well. So it's actually going to cost us international tourists from coming over here. It's going to be more expensive. Some of our tourists that would have come here from other states are going to go over to Europe while it's cheap. That's a big deal. About $6 billion a year we get off of people from other states and other countries coming in to visit. About $5.3 billion in local taxes. So that's a big deal. That could hurt us. And just think about your components. If you're an exporter, and maybe some of your customers are exporters, maybe it's a guy who owns an exporting business who wants to build a house. It's like, hey, it's $600,000 house just went down to like $400,000 because now he's nervous, right? It's going to be a big deal. Another thing we got to look at is interest rates. And I like to show this. This is the Federal Reserve balance sheet. And if you don't see it, the line just keeps going up. It's basically the gist of this story. Here's what happens during a recession when the Federal Reserve and everybody gets nervous. And what happened during COVID, and it happened during the Great Recession. Big bumps up on the balance sheet. Now here's what happens. Literally the government prints money. Hey, that's inflationary typically. But what they do with that money is instead of giving it to you, they go buy bonds with it and mortgage-backed securities and those kind of things. So why do people buy bonds? Why does the government buy bonds? If you buy bonds, the price of bond goes up, the interest rate goes down, right? They lowered the federal funds rate, which is the short end of the curve, the overnight bank rate. So they're trying to keep interest rates down. They keep buying until the economy recovers. And so now the economy is recovered mostly. So what do? You got $8.9 trillion of bonds on your balance sheet. And you've announced that, hey, in June, last month, we're going to start taking some of that off. What happens when they take these off? You sell bonds, the price goes down, the interest rate goes up. So not only are they raising it to banks, the market is raising us like, hey, I've got to demand more, higher interest. So it's two different pushes on the interest rates. That's why you've seen 30 years go up near 6% recently. Now things are down a little bit because of demand. The market controls this. The Federal Reserve doesn't, except for the fact of buying and selling bonds. So that's a big issue. Interest rates are a killer for a lot of things that people want to do. When you want to borrow money, capital expansion of a business, money's just got a lot more expensive. Why do you think all those internet companies and all the tech companies went down in stock price? It's because their stock is theoretically the present value of the discounted future profits. Well, if you have to discount it at 6 or 7% instead of 2 or 3%, then that company just got worth a lot less, right? So that's a big issue I think about. Think about government debt is all. It's not cool to think about government debt. We got a bunch of economists going around saying there's this new modern monetary theory. If you hear somebody espousing that, beat them to death now, please. It basically says we can print as much money as we want to and nothing will happen. Well, we printed a lot of money, didn't we? What happened? Does that not cause inflation? Yes, it does. So now we're in this debt. The U.S. GDP is less than this. There's $30 trillion worth of debt. I think about $27 trillion is the U.S. GDP. That's a big deal. Not such a big deal when interest rates are near zero like they have been. The good news is here, though, is about 90% of this is on fixed interest rate debt. That's the good news. But what happens when interest rates keep climbing, if they do, and then we have to refinance some of this stuff when those 10-year bonds and stuff roll off, then that becomes a super big part of our national budget every year. Now 124.7% of GDP. That is a big, big deal. All right, so I worry about debt. I worry about interest rates. I worry about the U.S. dollar. And think about this. The higher we raise interest rates, that makes the dollar more attractive. So that pushes up the value of the dollar, making it even worse. So think about that. And then there's one other thing, not just gasoline prices. We all know about that. You see it at the pump every day. Yes, we got a little relief going on here. Will it last? Who knows? Probably last until the hurricane rolls through here, especially if it comes through the Gulf. But here's something that you're probably not thinking about. Now tell me if your house or your business is dependent on natural gas. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 of you are right. Every one of you is wrong. 5. Here's why. And I tell this story a lot, and it's something that you don't even think about. And I always say it this way: do any of your households or your businesses depend on this newfangled invention called electricity? 70% of Florida's electricity is generated by natural gas. 70. If your power bill hasn't gone up, it's because your power company hedged and bought long-term contracts, which some of them did. God bless them. But when those contracts roll off, you know, electricity costs are going to go way up, assuming gas stays up the way it is. Here's the chart. We were paying $2 to $4 for a million BTUs of natural gas. Hey, fracking was a beautiful thing when you think about the natural gas market, right? We told the power companies, we don't want you to burn coal anymore. Let's burn natural gas. It's cheap. It burns cleaner. It's a lot better for the environment. You can't go back and burn coal, and you know other countries can do it, and they're doing it right now. But this is a big, big deal, and here's why. Remember, I'm a farm boy. What do I think about when I think about natural gas? It's not just heating your house or cooking. Maybe you cook with propane or natural gas or whatever. Fertilizer, food. I got a farm up in North Alabama where I grew up. Last year, we grew corn. We kind of rotate between corn and soybeans. Last year, $300 a ton for nitrogen fertilizer. Ammonium nitrate's the one we use, but there's lots of different options. This year, over $1,000. So more than triple in a year. Why? Russia invades Ukraine. Look at what's happening over there. Wow, big wheat producer. Wheat went up. They can't get the wheat out of Ukraine. Fertilizer prices, it's not just fertilizer made of natural gas, it's chemicals. You want to buy Roundup. You want to buy all these chemicals that we need. We no-till farm, so we use a lot of chemicals instead of plow the land up. Man, our costs just went up crazy. A lot of rotation out of corn into soybeans, even if if it's against your rotation. Some people are doing that because you don't have to buy nitrogen to grow soybeans. They make their own. I hope you learned some agriculture facts here today. But what's happening is that's going to drive food prices up. More expensive corn means more expensive cows and pigs. I mean, more expensive chemicals, more expensive everything in the food chain is going to go up unless we get a handle on this. And it's that's something that's those indirect things like electricity that you may not be thinking of. So all wound up, what's my estimate on what's going to happen on the U.S. recession? Let me be clear: U.S. recession versus Florida recession. U.S. super high probability we're going to go into one later this year or early. I've got a model that I run. I published it on the website of the company I used to work with every single month. What's the probability of Florida being in a recession in the next 9 months? And so I had to calculate it every month and put it up there. Sometimes I was wrong, sometimes I was right. But I'm going to tell you right now it's pinging at about 67%. 67%, that's high. Bloomberg says 72. A lot of the banks are in the 40s and 50s right now for a U.S. recession. Do we have to go into one? No, we don't. Things could turn around. we could get some relief. A lot of it is spending relief. If magically gas prices went down and we took some of the froth out, that's what the Federal Reserve is doing right now. You raise interest rates to lower demand. The problem this time is we still got a bunch of supply issues. So you can reduce demand. If you don't fix the supply issues, you really don't get that drop in price, right? On top of that, people had inflation expectations. Well, hey, you expect prices to go up. Just like, hey, I might as well buy now because the price is going to be higher next year, right? A lot of people are doing that. They're doing it with personal goods. They're doing it with their homes. It's like, hey, if you're looking, the prices, of a house is going to go up 10%, and interest rates are probably going to go up too. You go out and buy, and you pay whatever it takes. I mean, that's exactly what's been going on here in Florida. So back to the U.S., high probability. Here's why, if I can show it in one chart here. This is from the Wall Street Journal. This is a great chart. And rather than make my own, I just stole theirs. So I'm going to give them credit. It's up there on the right where I came from. Anytime you have a plunge in consumer sentiment, the dark areas in gray back there are recessions. The last 3 times we've had a substantial drop in consumer sentiment, it has led to a recession. So I'm assuming that this time it's actually going to happen. A lot of things are stacking up that it's likely to happen. Does it have to happen for Florida? No. It could, but it doesn't have to. The probability that Florida will fall in there as well. Now, if it's a long one, Florida will fall in. There's no doubt about it. If a short, shallow one, like some people are forecasting, doesn't have to happen. Watch the initial jobless claims number. Don't watch the national one. You can get the Florida one as well. That's a key indicator. If people starting to lay off people and they're starting to file unemployment insurance, that's a pretty good sign that you're about to go into one. If it happens on big scale nationally, it won't matter what happens in Florida. We'll still be in a recession because, we trade with the other states, and they're, if they're in a recession, they're not going to come to Florida as much, and, there's not going to be as much business activity. But I still believe this, and I will believe this until, I can prove it differently. You're better off being in Florida than anywhere else during this recession, if we have one. You are. People want to move here. They vote with their feet. Texas has been real popular. Let's be blunt here. Until Texas, the power grid went out during the winter a couple of years ago, Texas was getting as many people as Florida. That has slowed down. Businesses are a little afraid. If you're dependent on electricity for your process, maybe you're smelting aluminum or something that, hey, if the power goes out, man, it's cost you millions of dollars. Those kind of businesses will no longer move to Texas, and that's some high-value businesses. Florida's still getting those folks. So anyway, I think that that's where we are. I think Florida's certainly situated for the recovery better, better than the U.S. But we literally could have a situation where the U.S. is in a recession, and you'll hear it on the news. Yet Florida keeps on rolling, maybe at a slower pace, no doubt about it. But also there's some advantages. It will take some of the froth out of the markets. Not so much pressure on labor, not so much pressure on capital goods and everything with these short supplies that we have. And so anyway, that's what I think. I know there may be some questions, but I want to thank you guys for having me here. Thanks a lot. Sure. Who's got a question? Yes, sir. No, and you hear that. Every news agency has been publishing that. They're wrong. 2 consecutive quarters of down GDP does not make a recession. It's when those 8 people say we're in a recession, and I'm going to tell you they're not going to say we're in a recession because the job market and spending is still strong. Even if Q2 comes out as negative, I don't think they will. Not yet anyway. I describe it as when those 8 people say that it's in a recession, and I'm not trying to be a smart aleck here. I've got a different definition. There's a thing called a coincident indicator. It's an indicator of what business is happening right now, and it's reported every month by the Federal Reserve. And, it's a summation of business activity. When that thing starts going down, it never goes down 1 month and then up the next. If it starts going down, then we're in a recession. That's the way I would say it for Florida anyway. Yes, sir.
We had something very unique happen, which was called COVID, where millions were removed from the labor force and are never coming back. So yes, we have an exorbitant amount of jobs out there, but they're just never going to get filled. And so how do you account for the fact that we are in a negative growth curve? The yield curve is inverted, and inflation is going through the roof. How can you say that? I mean, I guess the question really is, what is your definition of a recession, and why does that matter to anybody? I mean, when you look at the fact that businesses are no longer going to be able to employ people because they're not going to be able to have the income, and there will be people that will fall into those jobs that they don't want to take because they need a job. Mm-hmm. But that's still a recessionary time because we are in this, because the Fed can't really do a whole lot right now because their balance sheet's so high, and they're bumping interest rates by 100 basis points coming up this month again.
Could be.
So all the things that they use to play with, they've kind of gotten rid of those tools because they've used them already.
Well, I like your argument, but I'm going to have to disagree that those people will never come back into the labor force. A lot of them will. And, about 25% of the people that were contemplating retiring have decided not to because of inflation. People will make decisions. And honestly, what's also happening is, let's say you're a nurse and you're retired. You didn't get your full 30 years in or whatever it took to get the full pension. You took a 15-year or a 10-year, and you get a little bit of money. Well, hey, when inflation is 8 and 9% a year, you're probably not going to be able to live on that. You may not be a nurse when you come back into the labor market. I will tell you, a lot of manufacturers are hiring nurses that got burnt out, especially for, checking their manufacturing floor. Because what do? They walk around and they write stuff down or put it in a pad. Instead of somebody's vital signs, it's the vital signs of some machine or some process. So I think you're going to see a lot of rotation, but a lot of people cannot afford to stay out of the labor market. They're using up their savings, but we don't know how many. We don't know how many. So you could be right, but I see it out there happening that people are returning to the labor force, aka failing retirement, and coming back into the labor force. And sometimes they're coming back to the same company, that they worked for before. So we'll see. One of us is probably going to be right. Nobody knows right now, though. You could be a better forecaster than me on this one. Yes, sir, in the back.
Do you have any thoughts on the divergence between GDP growth and household wealth growth, and is that sustainable? And if not, how does it resolve?
All right, tell me what you're talking about, the divergence between GDP growth and household growth.
Yeah, how household wealth growth has,
okay,
over the last 10 years, is way out past GDP growth.
Okay, yeah, that's a good point. That's a really interesting thing. Household wealth is actually pretty good right now. We've had, over the past few years, unless you were in the market early this year, a lot of people had a lot of money, and it's called the wealth effect. They're more likely to spend if their portfolio's up, right? Good for Florida because we run on sales taxes, but then when it goes down, it really cascades. People get afraid, then they become risk averse, and they put their money either in cash or in bonds. Not such a good place to be, but is it better to lose 8 or 9% on your cash that's sitting there versus taking a chance on losing 20 or 30% if you think there's a stock market crash coming in here? It's the uncertainty, I believe, that really kills. It kills the economy. People, once they've been burned in the markets, they tend to do something very, very conservative, and they lose out on that gain in wealth. Some of them sold out at good times, but think about what's happening in the cryptocurrency market. I never talk about Bitcoin and all that stuff. I never really understood it, to be blunt. I got a Ph.D. in economics. I don't understand this crap. I really don't. I got a nephew. He plays it. He makes money on it. God bless him. I tried to get him to explain it to me. Shit, I can't understand it. So if you lost a bunch of money, whether it's Bitcoin or whatever, you didn't lose money on your house, right? You know, you probably, if you've been normal and saved your money, your balance sheet, even through COVID, a lot of people, surprisingly enough, took those $1,100 checks or whatever they got and put them in the bank for hard times. You know, they probably had parents like me that beat it into them. It's like, save your money, son. You're going to be broke and die out on the street one day. But, you know, that's an interesting thing that only, you know, I can tell you what will happen in the long run, but I can't tell you what's going to happen in the short run. Nobody can. Good question. Anyone else? All right, thank you guys for having me. I've enjoyed being here.